This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
Of all the hucks I've ever seen, the quad backflip on BMX has got to be the fastest way to turn your brain into a soup from just G-force alone. This thing is insane. I can't imagine being on a bike, spinning around 4 times and landing it. And today we'll look at how this mind-blowing feat became possible. And we'll discuss whether we've hit the limit for flips on a BMX.
All the stunts you're about to witness in this video are performed by trained professionals. Obviously, don't go and try any of this yourself, as it could lead to serious physical harm.
In the early days of BMX, before anyone was doing flips and people were just cruising around merrily with a little smile on their face, the singular backflip was almost unanimously seen as impossible. It was like far too dangerous for anyone to seriously think of doing. And so one day, a person came along and heard all that and thought, I'll give it a go. And his name was Jose Yanez. Jose Yanez was like this unknown BMXer. He wasn't in like the cool kids club. He was pretty much an outsider that people didn't know about.
Just like a cat, I have to be able to land back on my feet after I've thrown myself upside down.
And on one day in 1985, Jose just rocked up and did a backflip on a BMX. And you gotta bear in mind, this was in an era where literally no one thought this was possible. This was like the BMX equivalent of being the first man on the moon. The backflip is so dangerous. If you think about it, like, no one knew the technique. You whip the handlebars, you lean back. If you come off the thing, you could land on your head, your neck, you could paralyze yourself. And yet Jose just stomped this trick. And of course, instantly word spread. This was talk of the town. Every single BMX publication wanted him on the front cover. Jose even landed himself a stuntman job in a film called Rad.
Rad is his way of life.
But, you know, for the wider mainstream world, this was the first time they would ever see a backflip done on a BMX.
Matt Hoffman from the US of A. I haven't seen anybody get more air than this guy on the ramp.
By the 90s, we had this new BMX star called Matt Hoffman. He had taken the backflip and started to evolve it. He was doing things like the flare. And by now, he was doing attempts at the tail whip backflip. And as well, by 1993, riders were starting to actually take the backflip and do it in competition. But whilst the rest of the BMX world were playing catch up with Jose, he was already laying double backflips into water by 1987. This boy was truly ahead of the curve. It was becoming clear that the ceiling for BMX aerials was way higher than people thought. Some might say sky high. However, it would take 10 years after the first ever backflip for the BMX backflip to see its next true level up, for the caterpillar to evolve into the butterfly, for Charmander to evolve into Charmeleon, and a third thing. In May 1997, in steps Jay Mirren.
Jay is going to go beyond extreme. Tell everybody what you're going to do.
I'm gonna throw a double back.
Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to Squarespace. Squarespace is the #1 platform for building a perfect website for you and your brand. Whether you're a small business or just a personal brand and you want to make yourself look even better, Squarespace has got you covered. There's nothing worse than a bad website. A website these days really is your shop front. And if it looks bad, no one's going to trust you. With tons of templates to choose from, you can perfectly customize them to suit exactly what you do and elevate your product. On top of templates, Squarespace has a ton of built-in tools. Things like email marketing, e-commerce, and members-only content. Every time that I've needed to personally make a website, I've always used Squarespace. It's just so simple, easy to use, and you don't need to be some IT expert to have a website that looks great. So be sure to check the link below and use the code JimmyTheGiant to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Anyway, back to the video.
On a Canadian TV show called Ordinary Extraordinary. This TV show built this whole setup specifically so that Jay Mirren could crack the world's first ever double backflip on BMX. And so whilst the producers would have been in panic mode thinking that Jay had just duppied himself on live TV, the boy pops back up on his feet and goes for a second attempt. And completely stomps the world's first ever double backflip on BMX. And from here, the floodgates were open. In 1999, the BMX legend Dave Mirra becomes the first ever person to land a double backflip in competition at the CFB contest. This was just a few months after Corey Nastasio did a double backflip off of a dirt jump, which resulted in a really nasty bail that knocked him unconscious. ESPN had caught wind that Dave Mirra had landed the double backflip, and him being the miracle man and the face of BMX, they wanted to present it at the X Games. And so in the 2000s X Games, Dave Mirra lands the dub ski in front of a massive audience.
Incredible, Dave Mirra.
This was like an iconic moment for BMX. This was like their version of the Tony Hawk 900. This moment of footage was shown all around the world and just elevated the legendary status of Dave Mirra and totally put BMX on the map. 2 years later in 2002, Mike Escler-Miller spins his booty over a helicopter ready to turn him into mincemeat. And in the same video, he stomps a 50-50 grind to backflip. By now, it's like the mid-2000s. And the singular backflip is starting to become a little bit more common. Matt Beringer is starting to do things like backflip wall slaps. He's doing flares in the streets. This trick that was previously seen as like a sketchy, sendy move was now starting to be controlled. By 2009, Dave Mirra is now doing backflip drop-ins on ramps. And for you as the viewer seeing all these different backflips, you might be fooled into thinking that it's not that dangerous. However, in 2007, tragedy struck. Stephen Murray, who had just hit the world's first double backflip on dirt at the X Games, geared up to do it again in Baltimore on June 22nd, 2007. But then Stephen lost control mid-flip, landed on his neck, and paralyzed himself for life. I mean, like, the backflip on BMX is no joke. Just because people were starting to get good at it didn't mean it was any less dangerous. However, despite what tragically happened to Stephen Murray, the envelope was still being pushed. But there was one problem. In order for people to push the backflip any further, something needed to change. The ramps that they were using were simply not giving them enough height or speed to push the trick any further. And so in steps the invention of the mega ramp. Comment below if you want a full video on mega ramps. By 2006, the big air events had become like one of the main events at the X Games. I really don't think much on earth comes close to the insanity of the mega ramp. Like, if you look at it now, even after all its years of existence, it still looks ridiculous. It's like the extreme sports equivalent of the big aerial events in skiing. In 2007, a guy called Jake Brown fell from 45 feet and was hospitalized. The skater called Danny Way also once landed on his back. However, this extra level of danger meant that crazier things were now possible. In 2011, a race had begun between two iconic riders and rivals, James Foster and Jed Milden, who were both battling it out to be the world's first person to do a triple backflip on a BMX. And so James Foster was ready, and he had planned at the Nitro Circus event in 2011 at Las Vegas, he would become the world's first person to do it in front of a massive audience. However, on the other side of the world, in Taupo, New Zealand, the rider Jed Milden had caught wind of what James was planning to do. And in what was possibly the dirtiest move in BMX history, probably sporting history, on May 28th, 2011, Jed Milden had very quietly built his own setup for the triple backflip.
I knew the date he was doing it, so I put it 4 days before him. Yes, very cheeky, but you got to do what you got to do to be the first in the world.
Jed Milden launches himself across a 42-meter gap and becomes the world's first person to land a triple backflip on a BMX, sparking a bit of a rivalry between him and James Foster.
Just because I didn't know he was gonna do it, and I get a call like, oh, world first, triple backflip, and just blew me away.
The triple is just nuts. Like, you see how quickly he spins. And achieving the triple didn't come without its injuries. Leading up to Jed's attempts, there were two riders that missed the airbag and were completely knocked out cold. Another guy had broken his collarbone, but all this sacrifice had led to the triple being completed.
Had kind of a dream the other night that I died, so I'm stoked now.
But you see, after this had happened, there was only one thing on the mind of the BMX community. Was the quad possible? By around 2014 to 2015, word was quietly spreading that the quad might go down. And so these two rivals returned to battle to become the first person to ever land a quad backflip on a BMX. And so to make amends for Jed's prior sneaky tactics, the two had agreed to attempt the quad backflip on the same day at the same time, from two different parts of the world. You had James in the USA and Jed in New Zealand. And so the big day arrived. Jed opened up his window, he looked out, and it was pissing down with rain.
Quite a bit of a disheartening situation right now with Mother Nature.
And in what was a very sportsmanly move, Jed called up James and gave him his blessing to attempt it without him.
Sitting on the top of the roll and staring at this thing.
Dude, drop in and stomp it.
Drop in. Come on, Foster. 1, 2, 3.
And he misses the landing. But somehow, he was completely fine. And so he attempts a second. But this time, he under-rotates it and breaks several of his ribs. And so with James injured and Jed being stopped by the weather, it looked like it was over. However, miraculously, the clouds had parted for Jed. And so without any hesitation, he drops in and he sends it straight away. And so he slammed hard, injured his spine, and was ambulanced out. And so people speculated, perhaps this was it. Maybe the quad was too hard, it was too dangerous, and perhaps it would never ever happen. 9 months after, in 2015, both James and Jed had fully recovered. And on a day that would become known as Revolution Day, both James and Jed had been flown out by Nitro Circus to go to Pastrana Land.
Probably the best for my mindset, just to drop straight in and quad.
On James's first attempt to a practice ramp, he slams his handlebars into his chest and is instantly stretchered off. And so now, only Jed remains healthy enough to even attempt it. But things weren't looking good. Like, he had attempted a few onto the practice ramp and was not getting anywhere near close.
I'm sick around on that airbag. You know what I mean?
Well, I understand. If you want it, just get it. You ain't setting no records on an airbag.
Okay, let's do it.
But to like everyone's surprise, Jed just said, let's get rid of the bags. I'm going for it.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, Jed!
And over-rotates a quad backflip and lands on his back. And then Jed just jumps back on his feet like he just tripped over his shoelaces or something. And he goes again. And he doesn't land it. And he goes again. And he crashes again.
And I hit the back of my head, and then I was pissed.
He lands absolutely perfectly and becomes the first person in the world to land a quad backflip on a BMX.
You're not going to believe what just happened. I just landed the quad flip.
However, after all of that, there is one question that still remains. Is this it for the BMX backflip?
I think that someone could do 5. I think that's possible. I think that Schmitty could do 5 with the right setup.
Oh my God. Yes, Schmitty! Yes! I just landed a quadruple backflip on a BMX bike, becoming the second person in history to do it. Thank you, people. 4 flips is done. See you at 5.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and watch this video right here.